All right, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by former governor of New Jersey, Christine Whitman, who is the co-chair of the Ford Party and president of the Whitman Strategy Group. Additionally, Governor Whitman was also the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under former President George W. Bush. So, Governor Whitman, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Glad to be with you.
So, just starting off, when did you first get interested in politics?
I was born and raised in it. My
Yeah.
parents were both very involved in the Republican Party. In fact, they were introduced to one another at the 1932 Republican National Convention. And so
Wow.
my grandfathers had also been very involved. My grandparents, I guess, both sides. Well, certainly my mother's mother. I'm not so sure about my father's mother, but in any event, and I'm the youngest of four by 8 years, so that it meant that I was the one that was at the dinner table with them. The rest had all gone off to schools in various
Oh,
places. So
sure.
I heard all the conversations about what was happening in the world and in the state and in the local community and was fascinated by it. And I was taken to the conventions and things like that as a
Yeah.
kid because I was hanging around.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, as you got older and, went off to college and stuff, did you start to develop kind of a slightly different political identity from your parents, or was it, pretty much the same?
Well, my father would say all I did was argue, but I think we were more aligned than not. I mean, when I went to college, I majored in international government because I'd spent so much time around domestic politics and doing, door to door, doing stamping, stuffing, sealing, and sending, as you have to do in those days, that I figured I knew a lot about that, but I needed to learn more and was interested in learning more about international government. So that was my focus. But my parents were very interested in all of that as well. I'm probably a little to the left of where they were. Well, my
Okay.
mother and I were more aligned than my father because she was a big Rockefeller supporter. He was not as enthusiastic. I mean, he was once Rockefeller was the nominee, but he felt he was too much of a big spender
Sure, sure.
initially.
Yeah, it's always interesting to kind of think about those family political dynamics and how things kind of change over time. And
Right.
so what was politics like then when you first started your career? Obviously, today people kind of feel politics is a little crazy. What was it like then?
No kidding. I mean, when you're dealing with people, which that's what politics is, you never know quite what you're going to get. And I can remember doing door to door and having doors slammed in my face and have people say it's my right not to vote. When they were right, but I mean, but nothing like it is today. It wasn't as personal and it wasn't as violent as some of the rhetoric. It could be nasty and not terribly pleasant, but generally it wasn't close to what we see now. It started to go off the rails. Well, I wrote my book in 2005, but that had been looking at trends since 1964. 1964 is where I'd peg the more, that's where things started to really, people started to harden in their positions. And, we had a group here of Goldwater supporters. They called themselves the Rat Finks, or they were called the Rat Finks. I can't imagine they call themselves that, but they were known as that. And I can remember going to a meeting. They were Republicans, and I went to a Republican meeting, and they called me a communist socialist. So I wondered if they'd ever read their history and knew what the difference was, or that there
Right.
was a difference. And they were pretty in your face. And I remember going to that convention in '64. But I can remember looking over, and when Rockefeller tried to speak, first of all, he was booed for so long. He finally just stood there and said, "Look, I've been given 5 minutes, and I'm going to take them. So if you want to keep on harassing me, that's fine. But when you're finished, I'm going to take my 5 minutes." But one of our New Jersey delegations, one of the men in the delegation got up on his seat and spat at him. And
Oh
I
my gosh.
remember being absolutely horrified, thinking, that's an adult male that is representing the state, and this is what's happening with politics. So it's been edging and getting edgier ever since then, really.
Yeah. So I know in your book you wrote about kind of how the Republican Party has become more extreme over time. You know, did you ever think when you wrote the book though that it would be like it is today, or is this beyond what you thought it would be like?
Oh, it's way beyond what I thought it would be
Okay.
like. I couldn't imagine this kind of scenario. I always thought that at least for Republicans, first of all, we believed in a balanced budget, and that's been out the window. Thank you, Republicans as well as Democrats. It's not just been Democrats, but we used to pride ourselves on that, and the rule of law. And now that seems to have gone by the wayside. Our belief in the rule of law and upholding the Constitution. It's something that really worries me deeply about the future of our democracy. Because when people start to turn away from the rule of law and find the Constitution just sort of an inconvenient document that might stop them doing what they want to do, that's a really bad place for democracy. And it's happening. We saw it January 6th. I mean, that was an insurrection. They tried. You
Yeah.
can't call it anything else. I mean, their
Right.
purpose was to stop the counting of those ballots and to overturn the election. They were very clear about it. That's not part of our democracy. We've never had that before. So it's at a whole different level now.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is completely insane. Even in a historical view, January 6th obviously takes the cake when it comes to craziness.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. How many Republicans do you think have that, were kind of traditional Republicans that had served for decades? How many do you think at this point have just kind of given up on politics and kind of left throughout state governments and the federal government
Mhm.
because of just how much the Republican Party has changed drastically?
Well, you see all the members who have resigned from the House and from the Senate have just said, I've had it. I'm not going to do I can't deal with this anymore. Those are the ones that, well, I think that's the wrong attitude to take. You've got to
Yeah.
stay in there to fight.
Yeah.
But, they've stepped aside because of how toxic the politics are. And I get it. It's really nasty. And we're losing a lot of people at the local level as well who are feeling personally threatened and their families being threatened, and it's just not worth it. They say it's not worth it. I don't want to put up with this. I don't want to expose my family to this kind of thing, so I'm just not going to engage. And once you start pulling back from the battlefield, you've lost the battle.
Yeah.
And so you got to stay engaged. That's my concern here.
Yeah, that's something that's, I think, one of the things I feel like isn't highlighted enough, how much, people just giving up and leaving the political system in general just opens up the gate for more kind of radical people to come in. I'm based in Indiana. I've done a lot of oral history interviews with former Indiana politicians, and it's amazing how many from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when they began their career, just feel like they want nothing to do with politics, that they don't recognize it anymore, and they're just
Mhm.
horrified by it. And I think that combined with just the number of young people today that just looks at politics as like hopelessly broken and don't want to get involved. So you kind of feel
Uh-huh.
it feels like you're losing people from both sides, the established
Right.
people that were normal and the young people that could help make it normal. Um,
Yeah, and especially the young people, it's their future, it's
yeah,
their country. If you think it's messed up, then let's do something about it. I mean, I can remember my father way back saying to people who would complain to him about this, what was going on, saying, well, did you vote? And if you didn't vote, I don't want to hear from you.
yeah,
That's it. You've got to participate. And, our founding fathers warned us about this. They did not like parties. Washington,
yeah,
Jefferson, Franklin. Franklin famously, when asked what kind of government they'd given us, a republic if you can keep it. And Lincoln's House Divided speech is very relevant today, unfortunately, because we're
yes,
moving toward a very divided House. And it's the aggressiveness of that division that has really made it different from, I mean, we've had differences in the past and we've had, you know, tough politics, the Vietnam era. I mean, I'm leaving as a given the Civil War,
sure,
but even in the more modern era, you've had it, but it was never this personal. And it was interesting. I heard from someone who was talking to an incumbent congressperson who said the difference today is it's not about power anymore, it's about fame. They
yeah,
don't even care about the power that much, although they want to keep it, but it's
sure,
about getting their name in the press. So how do you do that? You become more outrageous and more outrageous. It's about that fame factor, which is not serving us well as
no.
the public. The things that we need to get done are not getting done. So, that's what makes it even worse, I think, than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, definitely something I've noticed as well. And I mean, the media kind of loves to take those people that are on the extremes of the parties and then promote them the most and say, "Hey, look how
Mm,
crazy the other side is." And simultaneously, of course, the media also has really gone away from, I feel like, news reporting and more about just
Right.
commentary by pundits who are very partisan. And
Yeah.
so it is seem like we're kind of wrapped up in this weird kind of celebrity obsessed world when it comes to politics today.
Well, just about everything. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at some of the contracts some of these basketball players are getting
Yep.
and baseball players, and then you look at, okay, what are we paying our teachers who are, the ones who are responsible for the next generation who are going to make a difference to our lives?
Yes.
It's just everything's out of whack. I mean, multi-million dollar contracts for years for a basketball player. And you just think, okay, this is just way out of line, way out of line. But I don't know how you get that back. You're never going to get that back, I don't
No,
think.
it seems like
But,
people would rather be entertained than, kind of focus on things that actually make a difference and impact their lives. And so like all the
mhm,
money seems to be just going towards that.
right.
Like if you look
I
on,
know Trump.
yeah,
Trump keeps raising millions of dollars every time he says he gets he gets indicted or
yeah,
convicted. He
yeah,
raises money off it, and you want to say, really? I mean, he's just been convicted of a felony. You want a felon in the White House?
right.
And our founding fathers, again, they never considered this. They
No,
considered they were pretty prescient. The Constitution is a pretty amazing document, but this is one scenario they never envisioned.
no, this definitely highlights just how much history can change things over time because you don't know what
Right.
the future is going to be. And especially given just how much the world has changed drastically, since the founding of the country. I mean, the amount of technology,
Hmm.
who could imagine
Oh,
social media and the role it plays in things?
yeah.
It is wild. So, how do you think then this next election impacts the future of the American political system?
Oh, I think it's going to be critical, crucial. It's going to, the interesting thing that I say to people, maybe it's interesting when I say it to people, but an interesting to me is no matter who wins, there are going to be lawsuits, and we're going to need people in the attorneys general's offices, the secretary of states, the local council, all of those people who help oversee the outcome of elections, who respect the rule of law and will uphold the vote no matter how it goes. I'm afraid what we're going to see is if Donald Trump doesn't win, which I obviously fervently hope will not happen, that we're going to have riots. But frankly, I think we're going to have riots anyway. I
Yeah.
think his people will feel so emboldened if he wins that they're going to be out there with him going after people who have criticized him. I mean, he's called for that kind of action, and they listen to him, and they're primed and ready. They're locked and loaded on this. And so to me, okay, that don't let that fear factor be the deciding factor in whether you vote or for whom you vote. You got to get over that and just look at the good of the country and who you think these are two best choices. I mean, in a country this size, we should be able to do better than this. Although I have a lot of respect for Joe Biden as someone who
Sure.
cares about the Constitution and the rule of law and has shown he can at least hold our Confederates, our allies together, and understands the importance of alliances and our role in the international community. So he's that much is good, but he's old. I mean,
Yeah.
two ways about it. And boy, does that job take it out of you. It
Sure.
really does. So I understand people's concern about that, but at the end of the day, I'd rather have someone who respects the Constitution and the rule of law.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because we do have a pretty low bar as a country at this point when it just becomes like, okay, do you believe in democracy?
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that's what's so ridiculous when I tell people about Forward Party and say all they have to do is, I mean, we vet them for everything else, but then we don't have a platform that says you have to be pro-choice or
sure,
anti-gun or anything like that. We just say you have to sign a pledge that says you'll uphold the rule of law and respect the Constitution and work with anyone to solve problems, create a safe space for difficult discussions, and work to ensure that anyone who is legally eligible to vote gets to vote and stop all this effort that's being made to try to make it more difficult for certain segments of society not to get to the polls.
right.
That's just outrageous and heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for our country. We're better than this, a lot better than this. We used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I mean, most Americans, are generally on the same page in terms of what they want. It doesn't seem like people know how to sort of, I guess, promote that idea publicly. It seems like there's a lot of people that are just disengaged and don't care, or they kind of want this perfect candidate that doesn't exist.
Right,
And
right,
it seems like, okay, well, the enemy of good is perfect, and that's not going to
right,
happen. So not in a
right.
democracy, not in any system. And so it's very hard because I feel like there's so many different intangibles at play, and just kind of a lack of perspective about the situation in general that we're in today, and how to
Hmm.
get out of it. Like if you have any future policy goals that you actually care about, like, just preserving the status quo for the moment and then being able to move forward that knowing we actually have a democracy seems like the logical path forward. But it seems like
Hmm.
people are kind of just all over the place, not really fully letting sort of set in the predicament of today. So
Well, how serious it is. I mean,
yeah.
I'm always amused when I talk to people who are Trumper, who are supportive of Donald Trump. And when I say, but does it bother you that he says he's going to weaponize the Justice Department and he's going to specifically come after anybody who criticized him? And they said, oh, he's not going to do that. I said, well, okay, do you believe him when he says he's going to do away with taxes for the, well, cut taxes dramatically and do away with regulations? Yeah, 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 I believe in that. And okay, I mean, you can't
Yeah.
do it for some and not for others. And the really bad thing, and I just spent a week overseas and I was there for the 80th anniversary of Normandy. And when you talk to those veterans, we had the group I was with, the National World War II Museum that's in New Orleans. We had 8 vets at that ceremony, and there were 200 overall. But when you talk to them and you think of what they went through, and you walk those beaches and you are on the cliffs and you look down and at the expanses that they had to cover to come in under fire to preserve our democracy. And now we're letting it slip away because we can't be bothered. And we got into this position because average voter turnout was 10% in primaries. I mean, that's your most
Yeah.
partisan, your most extreme people who would go to the polls. And then, people weren't crazy about their choices at the congressional levels, so they wouldn't vote. And the good turnout was 34%. And presidential, we barely do better than 55%, which is pretty terrible in a democracy like ours. So people have to understand we did this to ourselves by not caring and not engaging. And democracy doesn't ask a whole lot of us, but it does ask us to be a little bit informed and to vote. And people have to remember that we're right at the knife's edge of losing what's so precious to us. And I think people don't realize if they wake up on the day after the elections in January and Donald Trump has won and they see things start to happen in Washington with which they're not comfortable, they don't realize, well, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what happens. And it's not going to be fun. It's very reminiscent of what went on in the 30s. His language is very reminiscent of what went on in the late 30s and early 40s. And that was not a pretty picture. We didn't end
Right.
up in a good place.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a big enough generation gap at this point where now younger Americans don't really understand the sacrifices that have been made historically to protect our system. And I feel like I was kind of lucky to be in the position where I am, where my parents had me when they're in their 40s. And so I had my grandfather, served in World War II and fought in the Battle of the
Hmm.
Bulge. And so I was able to kind of have these figures in my
Right.
life who could, talk about these historical events they saw. And so it is something that I've noticed a lot, especially being in, kind of at the last set of millennials, kind of on the edge between Gen Z and millennials, where I do just find a lot of people around this age just don't really get the historical
All right.
setting of what led to this moment today, and how easy it is that democracy, when taken for granted, can just go away if you let it.
Yeah. No. No. And we stopped teaching civics in the classroom when things got chopped. Civics was one of those. So a lot of people have no idea. You ask them 3 branches of government and they'll go, what? And they don't have that appreciation because they haven't been taught it, which is another part of the tragedy that we're not reaching them at a young age to help educate them as to what it is that we have that makes us so special. Why do all these people want to come here? We have a problem at the border. And it is a real problem and it needs to be solved. And unfortunately, both sides like to use it for political purposes, so it's not getting solved. But you want to say, why are those people wanting to come here? Because they want a chance at a better life. And are there bad guys in the mix? Sure, of course. I don't deny that for a nanosecond. But the majority of them are, and then most of the people who come in looking for a better life is because they can't get it in their own country. They don't want to
Yeah.
leave their countries. I mean, I was in El Salvador with the World Food Program, the U.S., the UN branch of the World Food Program, and seeing what that money is doing and giving people the ability to raise crops that are healthy, to engage in commerce, selling some of what they have, and talking to them. And they're so proud of what they've been able to accomplish. And they say they're doing things they never thought they could do. With a little help, they want to stay in their countries. They don't want to
Yeah.
leave. They want to
Right.
stay there. But
Yeah.
they have to see that there's an ability to earn a living and provide for their kids and be safe and secure. And if they don't see that, then we're still the shining city on a hill. I mean, we are. Our reputation, it's going right now.
Sure.
We're not as well regarded, obviously, as we have been in the past, but we're still the place people want to come because they see a future.
Yeah. Yeah, that is kind of a funny sort of aspect of like immigration debates, when people kind of assume that like, historically people were coming even, I know thinking about my own ancestry and kind of I've done a lot of genealogy research on that, but like, people don't want to change countries if they don't have to. They don't have to leave their
Right,
families
right,
and go. That's not
right.
exactly fun. Um, you know,
No.
people came here because they really just had run out of options and they want to have a life. So it
Well,
is
and they
kind of
saw
funny.
this as the best place that if they applied themselves, that
Yeah,
they
right.
could get ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So, if let's say Donald Trump is elected again, do you think that, there's enough people in the political system at the moment or will be in the future that will be able to kind of, push back on, his authoritarian tendencies or
Well, it's going to be hard to tell. A lot of, I mean, he could weaponize. He could nationalize the National Guard and take them
yeah.
out from under the purview of the states. States need to be working now on the scenario of what happens if Donald Trump is elected and be prepared for these kinds of challenges. But there are all kinds of things that he could do on day one. Of course, he's promised a lot of things on day one,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of powers that he could try to abuse and fighting back against them is going to be hard. We're going to have to depend on the patriotism of our military and our National Guard if they see and feel that he's gone beyond what is allowed. We have to have people in those offices of secretaries of states and governors and attorneys general who are going to stand up and fight. Will they lose? They might, but I mean, they have to put up the fight if they don't agree with what's happening. And it's going to be rough because I believe he's going to do what he says he's going to do.
Yeah. Right.
I I don't think he won't. And then the irony to me is the people who support him, those who are middle income, middle of the country, he wouldn't sit down with them for a drink to save his life. I
No,
mean, he
no,
could
no.
care less. In Atlantic City, I mean, first of all, his casinos were the only ones losing money, and I don't know how a casino loses money, but that's just my take. But he put a lot of small business people out of business because he didn't pay his bills in full. And he had his lawyers bring in the plumbers and the electricians all together, actually, and after putting a lot of pressure on them to build, do more faster in his casinos there, and said, okay, this is what we're going to pay you. And I don't remember whether it was 25 cents or 50 cents on the dollar. And they said, and you can sue us, you'll win, but you'll be broke by then. And they didn't have any choice. And so many of them eventually had to go out of business because of it. And yet, those are the people that think he's going to save them. He doesn't care about them. Tax cuts are going to be for the rich. They're
Yeah.
not going to not going to help the poor, the struggling.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, I don't think he has any inhibitions about sort of doing whatever he wants if in power. I think it's more of a question of whether he has the ability to actually do that. Because I feel like he's so kind of compulsive and lazy. He may he may not be able to necessarily do things
Well,
because kind of distracted pretty easily. But
Depends on who he puts in those
yeah,
offices too.
yeah, exactly.
And what happens with the Senate and the House? If he gets a Republican Senate that's going to pass through every one of his nominees, whether they're qualified or not, then we're
Sure.
really in a bad place because he's going to have syncopas. Everybody he's sort of identified as someone in whom he has an interest are people who will never say no to him. And just
Mhm.
yes, sir, no, sir.
Yeah.
You're brilliant.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Have you met him before? Given your,
Oh,
your
oh
governor of New
yes.
Jersey, I'm sure you must have.
Yeah. Yeah.
How'd
I've
that
met
go?
him several times. Well, the first time, right before I was elected, was fine.
Yeah.
That was fine. It was things really started to go south. Well, watching what was happening with the people in Atlantic City was not great. But I didn't have the full story then. But it was when my reelect, when I opened we did a tunnel into Atlantic City and opened the entryway to Atlantic City to make it more attractive and make it easier for people to get in. And we also opened access to a piece of property that Steve Wynn owned. And at that point, Donald Trump wanted to be the only person in casino in Atlantic City. And he was furious that Steve Wynn was going to be able to come in and develop his thing. And so he just came after me hammer and tongs, which
Wow.
is, fine. Part of it's fine. Some of his tactics were not so good, but it was just because he was mad that I didn't listen to him and leave him as the only major player in Atlantic City at the time, an individual, I should say, because there were other casinos.
Sure.
But he hated Steve Wynn then, and he fell in love with Steve Wynn, and then they've been back and forth in that relationship.
Wow. So it's always been interesting with him, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
Um,
Well, I've never seen anyone look more uncomfortable. He's been to my church twice now.
okay.
Once when he was running, because I think he had to tick that box that he could say, yes, I've been to church. And the other time was after they were elected, but he had Pence at,
Okay.
because his summer place is right down the road from me, and the church is right nearby his place. And he had Pence, so Pence is very religious, so he had to go to
Yeah.
church. And Donald Trump was so rigid and so unhappy and comfortable looking that it made me laugh, actually.
Like bringing your toddler to church or something. Yeah. Just
Well,
doesn't want to
he
be
didn't
there.
talk as much. Some of the little kids do, but they're
Okay.
fun to
So,
listen to. When the babies,
yeah, yeah. Okay, maybe like a teenager who's upset about being dragged there. I
right,
don't know. Yeah,
right.
that's funny. Um, do you think that the Supreme Court, based on its current makeup, would push back on Trump?
I would hope so. Given the current makeup, I'm less certain than I might be because the Supreme Court has been doing things that I've never seen a court do before,
Yeah.
which is to reach down to pull up cases that they want for political reasons, for ideological reasons. Although they just handed down a decision that protected some parts of reproductive health.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe if the push came to shove and it was really they understood it was the Constitution getting away from the social issues. And social issues, they're always going to be
Right.
very far right, it seems. But on the constitutional grounds, I would hope that they would
Yeah.
stand up for that and put a put some limits on what he gets away with.
Yeah. That's my initial take on it as well. Just kind of from my read on is that yes, they don't seem to like necessarily would be people that would get along much with Trump, despite him putting them in power. I feel like he didn't really know much about them. Probably didn't do any research on. He didn't like pick some friends to put in there. He ended up kind of picking just candidates that would fit the sort of party talking heads around him. But yeah, I would hope that they wouldn't, given their independence. I would hope that they would kind of do their own thing if push came to shove. So
I would hope so. We can only keep our fingers crossed and say a prayer.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm curious then, what role does the Forward Party play in the 2024 election, and how will the Forward Party kind of respond based on the outcome?
Well, we will have hopefully about 200 candidates across the country, and that's at the state and local level. We have some congressional that we've endorsed already and a senatorial candidate that we've endorsed already. But what we're doing is we're building a new party from the ground up, and it's going to be a tough slog, and it's going to take time. But what we do want to do is elect those people who will represent their constituents and not a party, and will stand up to and for, stand up for the rule of law and the Constitution. That's why they signed that pledge. It's to give them the freedom to be who they think their constituents want them to be, or who they want to be, and what are the issues of importance to them in that state. And so that's how this also started. The far right was very good at starting to elect people at the local level, because that's the feeder system. Then you move up from a county commissioner to a state legislator to a governor or whatever, and then you run for Congress or the Senate. There's a progression there, and a lot of times, and that's what we're starting. We're looking for people. We're also looking particularly, there are 500,000 elective offices in this country, and in any given year, 70% of them are uncontested. And our position is every voter should have a choice. There shouldn't just be one choice on the ballot for a particular office. And also, of those, 5 to 10% are never filled. And we also think every office should be filled. So that's where we're focusing. And we're focusing on those candidates who are still litigating or objecting to the 2020 election. It's time to move on. It's time to serve our country. And if we can find a candidate that meets our requirements, who's a good candidate, who'd be the right candidate for the people, so, then we'll support them, particularly in those areas.
Yeah.
So, if Trump wins the election, we just have to keep our heads down and keep going. Because, if you think about it, right now, really the biggest party in the country is the unaffiliated,
Yes.
the independents. Both Republicans and Democrats have been losing because both sides play these games with positions of importance, with issues of importance. We don't get the policy we need because they're used for political purposes. And so that's why we think anyway, that there'll be a continued interest in finding those people and supporting them. And then there's the reverse coattail effect. If there are people who don't want to go to the polls because they don't like their choices at the top, but they see a school board member or a local mayor or an assembly person that they know and they believe is sensible and sane, and they want them representing them, they'll go to the polls to vote for them. And then history has shown when that happens, they tend to stay on the ballot and look up and down for similar candidates. And so that's what we're hoping to see.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I feel like just looking at kind of the build up to this 2024 election, both the Republican and Democrat parties, I feel like have a lot to lose with this election. So I feel like the Forward Party would have a lot of potential, to kind of build off of the loss of whichever party, because you're kind of have to, either party's gonna have to go back to the drawing board big time if they lose this election, just given the stakes at hand. They'd put, all their chips into a candidate that isn't the future of the party, regardless of what happens with this election. And yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of space to take advantage of whichever party loses, I guess. So in terms of growing your own.
There's such diversity. Both parties like the way they've got it, the way they've done redistricting. They're set. They like their power. Once they find that independent parties or an effort like ours is real, they set up roadblocks. You wouldn't believe how many roadblocks go up. And all of a sudden the laws change as to what's required to get on the ballot. It's already so skewed for the two major parties. And then if you're in a number of ballots, signatures you have to get on the ballot. If it's 2,500 for a Republican or a Democrat, it's going to be 7,500 for an independent candidate. They just, and then once they see it really taking off, they do even more if they can. But after an election like this, depending on who loses, you're right, there's going to have to be a lot of rethink. But it's also going to depend on the turnout, how big a turnout it is. It's extraordinary to me that in those initial primaries, in the early primaries, you had Trump. Well, he would win it. He would win. He had a candidate who wasn't even on the ballot who would take 20% from him.
Yeah, that's true.
She had to be written in. Well, some states she was still on the ballot because she hadn't gotten off that early. But so there's clearly a discontent there in the Republican Party, and my hope is that they don't just stay home, that they may not like Joe Biden, they may think he's too old, but you know, they'll go and vote for him because they want to preserve our democracy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, hope for the best. I mean, in general, I've always kind of found it strange that we have this, two-party system locked in even way before the chaos of today. It's kind of
Right.
like going to a restaurant, like, do you want Pepsi or Coke? And those are your two choices. It's like, what's going on
Exactly.
here?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, hopefully we see more headway with the Forward Party. But given your vast political experience and in spite of the historic chaos of the day, what gives you hope for the future in America?
Well, the people who are coming to the Forward Party, they're the kind of people who really do care, and the young people that are involved. I'm also involved as a co-chair of States United Democracy Center, which is totally non-political, but it works with governors and secretaries of states and states attorneys general to help them legally. So if they want to fight back against some of these um, challenges that are coming to the political system, work with law enforcement as to what's appropriate around a ballot box, about a polling place, helping to educate people. And it does that kind of thing. The people who are attracted there, and the young people that care. There are a lot of young people who care, and they do give you hope for the future. But there's so many who don't. That, as you pointed out earlier, that just to sort of wash their hands of it. But I'm seeing enough of young people, and it could just be that I'm in a small bubble, which is probably true, where the people that come to Forward, a lot of them are young and they're just frustrated, and they say we
Yeah.
want someone who's not one of these beholding to one of the two parties. I mean, people don't recognize what control the parties have. In 1997, right after my reelect, I was asked to run for the U.S. Senate. And I really didn't want to, but I said, yeah, I'll go down and talk to them. And I went down, and that was 1997. And I went into the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, and I was told in no uncertain terms that if I said one word about campaign finance reform, no support,
Yeah.
no support. They'd walk away entirely. And so I walked away entirely because that's not the way I play the game. But I mean, it's just it's just amazing that the power they have over people. If they want to stay in office, you want to stay on the good side of your party leadership, and that means they tell you what you should be talking about and how you should be talking about it, not what you think or what your constituents might want.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people echo that, and just like all the funding for your campaigns that can disappear if you upset
Right.
the wrong people in your party. It is creepy to see how much control
It
there is at
is.
the top.
Right.
Um, kind of losing your independence and individuality there as a person.
No,
So
that's what we're attacking. We're saying to those people who will stand up, we'll have your back. We'll be there for you. We'll find volunteers to work for you. We'll try to raise money for you. We have some money we'll give to you, but we want to support the people who want to represent the people.
yeah, definitely. So, before I let you go, is there anything you're currently working on beyond, all the Forward Party stuff? Any new books or something coming out, or
No new books, no
no
new
new
books.
books?
Those two things are really taking up a lot of time, as
Understand.
is the World Food Program, and then I'm on the executive committee at the National World War II Museum, which is just extraordinary. So there's a lot to be done with that. So
Sure.
I'm involved in a number of different things, and then there are always environmental issues
Yes.
to deal with as well.
No, it makes total sense. Well, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time, and thank you for all the work you're doing. It's pretty impressive to see that you continue to serve the country for so long, and yeah, it's definitely energizing for people to see that. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you for what you're doing on your podcast and bringing information to people, because as we sort of discussed earlier, that's missing sometimes.
A little bit. That's right.
A little bit, a little bit.